Henry VIII Kanam Ka Matlab Aaj Bidinaya Barmain Ek Ace Shaks Se Jota Jata Hai Joek Taraf Se Takator or Shahi Hukmarin the Lekin Dusri Taraf Se Uski Zindagi Ka Sachitna Ganana or Kafnak the Ko Kitaban Eni Hamesha Ise Chupaya. By the end of his life, Henry literally ek walking corpse ban chuka the Uska Jism Itna Bura Halit Main the Ku Apni Hai Malaysim Uski Pas Kurahon Se Gabrate the Henry Ki Kamar 54-inch Tijo Am Admi Ki, Lambai Se Bizayata Hodi Hai. Uska Wazan Takriban 400 pounds the Jabka Samani Main Ex Sahatmand Mard Ka Wazan, Surf 140 pounds Ku Aas Pas Hoda the. Lekan Asal Kauf Uski Wazan Esi Nahi. Baki Uski Tangan Ki Dardnak Wounds Esi the. Uski Tangan Par Bade Ulcers the Jo Kabi Bart Hai Nahi the. Harwaktuns Peep or Gosh Galkar Nik Alta Reda the. Badbuitni Shidit Kiti Ka Log Dursi Hai Apni Nok Dok Leet. Kuch Likni Whale Kate Hain Ku Uski Bu Por Mahal Ku Cameron Tak Mesus Hodi T. Mulazamine Usko Kapta Painain Ko, Saza Samaged the. Wahanitna Gananaminzer Hoda the Ku Mulazamine Apni Beach Straw Draw Kardi, Ku Kisko Henry Kapas Janapade. Ye Surf Ek Zahiri Bamari Nahi T. Baki Uski Puri Personality, Bitabdil Ho Gai T. 1536 Ku Ek Jousting Accident Main Henry God Se Jira, or Du Gantak Bahash Raha. Us Wakt Ka Doctors Any Samajlia the Ku Wamar Gaya Hai. Lekin Wazindabak Gaya, or is Chat Any Uska Dimak Hamesha Kulia Badaldia. Modern doctors Mant Hain Ku Usi Traumatic Brain Injury Hui Tijis and Usko Paranoid. Gus Se Bara or Zulm Karn Walabana Dia. Surf Yehinahi. Kuch experts Kate Hain Ka Henry Ko Cushing Syndrome the Ek Hormonal Disease Jo Wazan Ko Control Nahi Hon Dedi or Mood Swings Ladi Hai. Shayad Isi Waja Se Uski Tanj Kabi Thik Nahosaki. Uski Apni Doctors Itni Dare Hu the Ku Wakud Sachboln Ki Himat Nahi Kardi. King Ka Health Parshak Karna Bias Wakt, Treason, the Yani Gadari. Henry VIII is remembered for one thing above all. His 6 wives. But behind the schoolbook rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived, lies a far darker reality. One that reveals the king's cruelty, paranoia, and obsession with control. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had been married to his brother before Henry took her as his queen. For 20 years she was loyal, dignified, and deeply religious. Yet Henry's desire for a male heir consumed him. When Catherine could not give him a surviving son, he discarded her like a broken tool. He forced the Church of England into existence just to rid himself of her. Catherine was stripped of her crown, banished to remote castles, and left to die alone. Next came Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom Henry had turned the world upside down. He was obsessed with her, promising her the throne, writing her love letters dripping with passion. But the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. Once Anne gave birth only to a daughter, Elizabeth, Henry's affection soured into suspicion. He accused her of adultery, witchcraft, even incest with her own brother. Historians agree these charges were fabricated. Yet Anne was dragged to the Tower of London and executed by a French swordsman. Henry did not even attend her beheading. He was out celebrating his new freedom. Anne's cousin, Jane Seymour, followed. Sweet, gentle, and submissive, Jane gave Henry the one thing he craved most: a legitimate son, Edward. But her triumph was short-lived. Just days after childbirth, Jane died from infection. Henry publicly mourned her, calling her his true wife. In reality, Jane's death spared her from the cruelty and suspicion that had consumed her predecessors. Henry had her embalmed and buried with great ceremony. She would be the only one of his 6 wives to rest beside him in death. But Henry was not finished. His 4th wife, Anne of Cleves, was chosen through a political marriage arranged by portraits. Whe, if you thought Henry VIII's personal life was horrifying, wait until you hear about his table. The king's appetite wasn't just large, it was legendary. His banquets became spectacles of overindulgence, designed not only to fill his stomach but also to display his wealth and power in the most grotesque way possible. Every day, over 600 servants were required to prepare his meals. The kitchens of Hampton Court Palace were the largest in all of Europe, running like a military operation. Fires roared in massive hearths, spits turned with entire oxen roasting, and bakers worked endlessly to produce mountains of bread, pies, and pastries. For Henry, food wasn't simply sustenance, it was theater. At a single feast, Henry could consume what might feed 100 common families. Venison, beef, pork, swan, peacock, sturgeon, eels, and capons, all dripping in rich sauces, lined the royal tables. Exotic fruits and sweetmeats imported from faraway lands showed off England's reach. The sight alone was overwhelming, but what was even more disturbing was Henry's personal role in this gluttony. He gorged himself without restraint, ignoring the warnings of doctors who begged him to curb his habits. By his late 40s, his once athletic frame had ballooned into obesity. Reports describe him consuming up to 5,000 calories in a single sitting, a staggering amount when most peasants barely survived on 1,000 a day. And it wasn't just the eating, it was the drinking. Henry's goblets were rarely empty. Ale, wine, and mead flowed like rivers. His physicians noted how the alcohol and endless feasting worsened his ulcers, heart, and mood, but their advice was dismissed or punished. But the most unsettling part? Henry demanded that his banquets be watched. Foreign ambassadors, nobles, and guests were often required to attend his meals, not to eat, but to witness. The king wanted the world to see his dominance through sheer consumption. While children across England. By the later years of his reign, Henry VIII was no longer just a man battling his decaying body. He was also a ruler consumed by fear, suspicion, and relentless paranoia. The once charismatic young monarch had become a tyrant who trusted no one, not even his closest advisors or family members. His court, once a place of pageantry and ambition, had transformed into a nest of fear where a single wrong word could mean imprisonment or death. Henry's paranoia was not unfounded. He had alienated the Catholic Church, severed ties with Rome, and declared himself the head of the Church of England. This monumental break with tradition left him isolated in Europe and vulnerable to both internal rebellion and foreign threats. He believed enemies lurked everywhere, among his nobles, within his council, and even in his own household. Anyone could be plotting against him. Anyone could betray him. The king's obsession with security became almost pathological. His palaces were filled with guards, secret passages, and heavily locked chambers. Visitors were scrutinized, their movements carefully monitored. The Tower of London, once a symbol of royal might, became a grim reminder of Henry's cruelty. Nobles, clergy, and even queens passed through its gates, rarely to emerge alive. Spies worked throughout the kingdom, reporting whispers of disloyalty directly back to the king. Many courtiers learned to survive by practicing silence, flattery, and constant vigilance. Yet even the most loyal servants could not guarantee safety. Henry's suspicions shifted like the wind. One day a man could be his trusted confidant, showered with titles and riches. The next, he could find himself dragged to the scaffold, accused of treason. The king's paranoia reached new heights in his personal life. After executing 2 of his wives, he constantly doubted the loyalty of the others. He demanded obedience, submission, and absolute control. To defy Henry was to sign your. By the year 1547, Henry VIII was no longer the handsome warrior king of his youth. He had become a swollen, immobile, and grotesque figure, trapped in a body that had long betrayed him. His once powerful legs were eaten away by ulcers so deep and foul that doctors could not bear the stench. He could barely move without mechanical devices lifting his enormous bulk. Each breath rattled in his chest like a broken bellows. The King of England, once feared across Europe, was now little more than a decaying corpse who still drew breath. Servants whispered that death itself seemed reluctant to approach him. At night, Henry would cry out in pain, his groans echoing through the darkened halls of Whitehall Palace. He was haunted by visions, the ghostly faces of his discarded wives, the accusing stares of men he had executed, and the thought of the God he had defied by tearing England away from Rome. Though priests tried to offer him comfort, Henry's soul seemed restless, clawing against the inevitable end. His doctors, powerless, turned to desperate measures. They stuffed his ulcers with cloth, covered his sores with strange ointments, and prayed that the king might last another day. But it was hopeless. The body of Henry VIII was collapsing under its own corruption. His once thunderous voice had dwindled to a hoarse whisper. He could no longer ride, no longer fight, no longer command with the presence that had once terrified nobles and commoners alike. On January 28, 1547, at the age of 55, Henry VIII finally slipped away. Yet even in death, his grotesque legend refused to rest quietly. His massive coffin was sealed and prepared for burial at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. But as his corpse lay in state, gases from his decaying body built up inside the coffin. Days later, in the dead of night, the coffin burst. Putrid liquids seeped out, staining the floor, and legend says a dog licked up the vile discharge. To many, it was a phaeton,